So, Neapolitan or margherita pizza. It's one of my absolute favorite pizzas in the entire world. But making a homemade restaurant quality version of this is basically impossible. Or is it? Today we're gonna do a little challenge. I'm gonna try and make an authentic, or as close to authentic as possible, margherita Neapolitan pizza in my home kitchen. And somehow I have to get my oven up to insanely hot temperatures to mimic those ovens that they use in Italy to make this pizza delicious. Today, I'm trying to master Neapolitan pizza. Let's get started. So here's the game plan. The first thing that we're gonna do in this recipe is we're gonna try to follow the Neapolitan recipe and the Neapolitan guidelines as much as we possibly can. That means we're gonna use the Neapolitan dough. That means we're gonna use the ingredients that they recommend. We're gonna try to keep to this as much as we possibly can. But I know we're gonna have to make some concessions along the way because I don't have one of those big pizza ovens that gets really, really super hot. So rule number 2 is that there's no specialized, expensive equipment allowed in this challenge. Basically, I'm gonna try to use things that you would typically find in the home kitchen. None of those fancy, really, really expensive ovens that you're seeing people use. No hacks to my oven, nothing like that. And lastly, we want as many of the characteristics of the margherita pizza, the Neapolitan pizza, as we possibly can. We need some of that charred spotting on the bottom of the crust, slightly melted cheese, and a puffy crust, which they call a cornisone, or if you know how to say it, let me know in the comments, but it's basically that sort of little bit of puffy crust on the outside. So our pizza needs to start off with an authentic dough. There is a specific way that the Neapolitan pizza dough is made, and it starts with really good flour. This is from the brand called Caputo. They're actually from, let me get a little closer in here. This is actually from Napoli. What's really important is right here. This is 00 flour. The question is what recipe to use. Here's my phone. Here we go. So I know the Neapolitan pizza dough is really, really simple. I believe it's only 4 ingredients. We need to find a recipe to get the proportions right, the hydration of that dough right. Recipes. Neapolitan pizza. This Caputo brand, they have their own recipe. That's step 1 in making our Neapolitan pizza. I'll start by adding the flour into the bowl of my stand mixer and then add some dry yeast. This is instant yeast or bread making yeast, so I don't need to activate it. The Caputo people say to add the salt separately, so we'll do that in a few minutes. I'm going to measure out my water. This is about a 64% hydration dough. So for 1 kilogram of flour, I'm measuring out 640 grams of water. Also, the recipe says that I can use a mixer. It also says you can do things by hand, but I don't feel like I'm breaking any rules by using this stand mixer. I'm gonna use the dough hooks and mix everything together for a few minutes to start off with, and then slowly drizzle in the water and mix it until the dough forms. Then I'm gonna add my salt in and mix for another 10 minutes on low speed. So this dough is super smooth. It says it's supposed to form a pumpkin, whatever that means, but I think this is pretty good. Now I need to let this rest for about 30 minutes. So I'm gonna set this aside. So one of the big things I was thinking about in this challenge is the 00 flour absolutely necessary? Give me 1 second. Here I've got just regular old all-purpose flour. This is the typical stuff that you get just at the supermarket. I'm gonna make the exact same dough except use all-purpose flour this time, and we're gonna compare them to see if it's actually worth it to spend a little bit of extra money and the extra hassle in getting 00 flour. So this sat for 30 minutes at room temperature. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it on a floured cutting surface, and we're gonna cut this down into about 240, 250 gram balls, and then tighten them up using our fingers, rolling it just sort of like this, just using your pinkies, sort of squeezing them together and trying to form as tight of a ball as you possibly can. And I found these sort of deli containers, which I think are gonna work. They might be a bit small. I don't have a good small sheet tray, and the ones that I do aren't gonna fit in my fridge. So I'm gonna use these. Basically gonna pop them in here. I'm gonna put a little bit of olive oil on the bottom just to prevent them from sticking, not too much. And then we're gonna set this at room temperature for 1 hour, and of course label them so I can tell the difference between each one when I'm done. So this is rested at room temperature for about an hour. You can see it's puffed up a little bit. Hopefully these containers are able to hold this. I think it should be fine because we're gonna put these in the fridge for 12 hours to cold ferment. And that's really all we can do for today. So we'll check back in tomorrow and we'll see how our dough turned out.
the next day.
So this is the 00 flour one. It was probably about there when we started, and it's risen almost all the way to the top. The AP flour one, though, this is wanting to burst out of this container. I'm not sure if that's because of the flour. I think the AP ones weighed a little bit more. I think I had an extra 10 grams in there, but, you know, pairing them side by side, even then it's hard to explain this. Here, I'm gonna take off this lid. Whoa! There's a lot of built-up gas in there. Let's see on this one. No, there's not as much built up in there. So what we need to do now is let these sit at room temperature for about 3 or 4 hours. Basically, they want to come up to room temperature, that we're not taking cold dough and putting them in a hot oven. That's gonna give us enough time to talk about the ingredients that we're gonna use. Here I have a can of Italian tomatoes. Now these aren't San Marzano tomatoes, which I think is probably the most authentic. I couldn't find those anywhere. Where is it on here? These at least come from, it looks like southern Spain, so hopefully these will be good enough. What we're gonna do with these though, I'm gonna drain them for about half an hour because I want as small amount of liquid going into this pizza as possible. And then the key with this is that these are crushed by hand. This is on the website, this is how they say to do it. I'm gonna take my hand to these, crush them, try and get them basically as finely as I possibly can. I was thinking about using a blender here, but I don't want people to go crazy at me in the comments. The second thing that I have, this is buffalo mozzarella cheese. You can see it's stored in liquid. We're gonna rip it up into sort of small chunks and set it aside, and we'll put that on our pizza in a few minutes. So I've got a whole lot of basil here. Nothing too fancy. I'll just wash this and set this aside. And then eventually I'm gonna need some olive oil. So I've got this. These are all the ingredients that we need. There's only one more thing that we need to talk about. And so this is a pizza stone. This basically is just gonna go in the oven, and the pizza's gonna go right on top of here. It's not gonna get as hot as those wood-fired ovens, but hopefully it gets hot enough to having a really, really great and authentic Neapolitan pizza. What I need to do though, is about an hour before I'm gonna start cooking these pizzas, I'm gonna set my oven to the hottest that it will possibly go, and then put my pizza stone in the oven to heat up. It's gonna take a while for that stone to heat up and to retain a lot of heat, so that hour-long preheat is absolutely essential for our pizza. So I'm gonna start by lightly flouring my work surface, and we're gonna do the 00 flour pizza first. Gently remove it from the container. We want to preserve as many of the air bubbles as possible, so be really gentle here. And I found the easiest way to form this into a dough is start with your fingertips at the center and spread out from there. Once you can't push out any further, I'm gonna gently lift this up, put the center under one hand, let gravity help you stretch from one side, and then pull with my other hand, sort of rotate as you go. It sounds more complicated than it is, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. This is about 9 inches, 23 centimeters or so, which seems like a decent size for one person. I don't have a pizza peel, so I'm gonna use my cutting board. Remember, we said no fancy appliances. I feel like a pizza peel only has one good use, which is why I don't really have one in my kitchen. Now we'll add our ingredients. Got about 2 tablespoons of those crushed tomatoes, then a sprinkling of the mozzarella. I'm ripping up a few of the basil leaves, putting it on top as well, and then slide it onto my pizza stone. So this ended up spending about 15 minutes in the oven, way longer than a wood-burning oven would, where it's usually sort of 90 seconds, 2 minutes, I think probably 3 minutes max. Very little charring. I mean, there's maybe a little bit there. The bottom is without any of the charring or the spotting that you want to see. Because it's spent so long in the oven, sort of all of that cheese has really just sort of melted, as opposed to that sort of half-melted thing that you get in the Neapolitan pizzas. So, not a great start looks-wise. We're gonna taste it, but before we do that, let's make the second pizza with just the all-purpose flour dough so we can do that experiment at the same time. Let's try the one with the dough, with the authentic dough, with the 00 flour dough. I mean, those fresh tomatoes from Italy are just so good. The cheese just sort of is getting lost in it. I mean, the dough is really, really nice and chewy. Hey! The all-purpose flour one was really, really hard to work with. In fact, I ripped the dough when I was making it, and it had a really hard time going on the peel. I'm not really sure why that was, but let's give it a try. Yeah, I mean, the 00 one is better. I guess chewier is the word. It just tastes more like a pizza dough. All-purpose flour one is okay. If that's all you have and all you can use, you could probably get away with it. But we have a big problem with getting this cooked a lot faster. So my oven maxes out at about 500 Fahrenheit, or about 260 Celsius, like you can see here. And that's about half of what we need. So that is a major, major problem for us. Not really sure how we're gonna fix this. This might just be an unsolvable problem. Let's see if there's any hints or any tips from the internet. It's One option that's suggested here is to use sugar, to add sugar to the dough. I feel like that goes against the spirit of this challenge, and I think it goes against one of our rules sort of too directly, so I'm gonna try and avoid doing that. This is a really interesting idea. What they're saying to do here is to use the broiler setting on the oven as opposed to the bake setting. I mean, that makes some sense to me. The broiler can get super hot, and especially if I can get the pizza right underneath the broiler, I think we're gonna really be able to blast the top with a lot of heat really, really quickly. So the problem is I don't think I'm gonna be able to get my pizza stone underneath the oven and have sort of enough room for me to move under the broiler. Let's go look around in the kitchen and see if we can find another way to do this. This isn't gonna work. So I think this is gonna work. This is just a regular frying pan. This one's carbon steel, so it can go in the oven. If I preheat this pan, and then I could slide this underneath the broiler. This might work because we can have the heat from the top from the broiler and then the heat from underneath on here to try and get that really spotted, charred underneath that we want. So I think this is a good idea. Let's give this a try. So just like before, I'm gonna lightly flour my work surface and then take out a ball of my dough, my 00 flour dough. Just spread everything out like we did before, spreading from the center with our fingers and then putting it under our hands and trying to use gravity and pulling with the other hand, trying to stretch this as much as we can. I had preheated the pan on my stove, and then one thing I forgot to do last time, dust the peel with semolina flour. So what I'm gonna do is dust the pan with semolina flour this time. I'm gonna carefully lay my pizza dough right into the hot pan. Then I'm gonna bring this over to a burner and set it over sort of medium-high heat, or try and get that charring that we want on the bottom. This is puffing a lot sort of all through the pizza, which probably isn't great, but let's keep going. I'm gonna add my 2 tablespoons of sauce, put on my cheese, sprinkle it with a bit of oil and basil, and then throw it in the oven at the very top, as close to the broiler as I possibly can. So I can already tell on looks alone this is way better. Let's take this piece maybe. The cheese is still white, which is really what we want, and most importantly, we're getting some of these charred bits. On the other side, I think we went too far. It's only spent about 2.5 minutes in the oven, so we've sort of solved that problem of the hot oven, but I think the crust, maybe it's better seen from this angle. We didn't really get that pronounced crust that we talked about at the very outset that we really want on this, but let's give this a try. Ignoring the slightly burnt taste from the bottom, now you can taste that sort of buffalo mozzarella cheese. It tastes really good. So we've really only got a couple problems to solve. We've got to fix the crust and we've got to fix the bottom. I don't even know what to do now. This might just be an impossible challenge. You may not be able to make a Neapolitan pizza at home.
Show us, friends, how to make the best pizza on the planet.
Let's get into it.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's pretty. You got the mozzarella, you got your tomato sauce, you got your leaves of basil. Bingo.
So here's something interesting. Remember that when the dough was puffing in the pan, when we first sort of put the dough in that preheated pan? Basically, that wasn't good. The bottom of the pan was heating up the pizza, obviously. The air pockets are expanding, the water that's sort of trapped in there expands, and then it's supposed to set. Problem is there was no heat from over top, it was just from underneath. So I think what we need to do is basically just flip the process around. If we go under the broiler right away, it's gonna get blasted by heat. Those dough bubbles should set, and it sort of should just be around the outside of the dough, so we should get that puffy dough that we really want. And then I think it's gonna kill 2 birds with 1 stone, because I can check the underneath of the pizza afterwards and sort of adjust it as opposed to trying to guess. I think we've got a plan. Let's try it one more time and see how close we get to a Neapolitan pizza. I think we've finally done it. I think we've cracked the code. We've got that really puffy crust, you know, it bends over the top. The bottom is nicely charred. It's soft, it's chewy, it's everything that you want in a Neapolitan pizza. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. So good.